These are the 10 best rares and mythics in Tarkir Dragonstorm draft. You should take these cards incredibly highly, and you should often even switch colors or try to splash them if you get them later in packs. First up is Ugin, Eye of Storms. For 7 mana, you get a Planeswalker that comes into play with 7 loyalty and has a cast trigger that gets to exile up to 1 target permanent that's 1 or more colors, which is basically everything in this set except for the basic lands. Then, if you cast other colorless spells, you get to exile more permanents, so if you have any artifacts in your deck, they'll fit right in. The only real ability of Ugin that you're going to be using in limited most of the time is the +2 ability to gain 3 life and draw a card, but that is still formidable attached to a card that already functioned as a removal spell in your deck, because now your opponent is going to really struggle to finish you off if they're trying to be aggressive, because gaining 3 life is going to be a huge damper on that plan, and drawing an extra card every turn means that control decks aren't going to be able to outvalue you. So it's just great in every scenario. It's a great removal spell, a great card advantage engine, a great stabilization tool. This card is fantastic, and it's even colorless, so no matter when you get it in the draft, you'll be able to take it and put it into your deck. Next is Elspeth Stormslayer, another Planeswalker. For 5 mana, you get a 5 loyalty Planeswalker that lets you create twice as many tokens if you are going to be making tokens, and then conveniently it has the ability to make a 1/1 soldier creature token with its +1 ability. So you could bring this into play, it comes in with 5 loyalty, you +1 it, immediately make 2 soldier tokens, and then eventually you can use the 0 ability to put counters on every creature you control and give them flying, which is going to finish off your opponents in most cases. Or if you need to kill a pesky threat from your opponent, you can do the -3 ability to destroy a creature an opponent controls with mana value 3 or greater. So it does it all. It answers problematic threats, it makes you an army, it makes that army into a game-winning threat. Perfect card, top end of your curve. And at 5 mana, it's going to be coming down consistently. So a really great card to have access to. Next is Scavenger Regent. This card is really powerful, partially because of its flexibility and partially because it's just fantastic. So 4 mana for a 4/4 flyer with ward, discard a card is just great on its baseline. It's a huge flyer, it hits like a truck, and your opponent is going to be at a disadvantage when they deal with it unless they're able to somehow block it down in combat, because the ward ability means they have to discard a card, which gets you a 2-for-1. The really scary ability on this card, though, is the Exude Toxin Omen, which for X black lets you give each non-dragon creature -X until end of turn. And because you know this is coming and your opponent doesn't, you can play around it in some really powerful ways. So for starters, you can hold some of your smaller creatures in your hand while you're setting up to wipe the board. But you can also do things such as put extra +1/+1 counters onto a creature or buff up one creature to be a little bit bigger so that after you use the -X mode, you'll still have a big creature in play. So if you have something like a 6/6 in play, you can give the whole board -4/-4 or something like that. Keep your 6/6 around, things like that. The setup around this card and the fact that your opponent doesn't know it's coming is really great. And when you cast the Exude Toxin ability, it shuffles back into your deck. So you're going to have access to a board wipe later in the game, potentially, if need be, or just shuffle back in that 4/4 dragon to cast and then clean up the game post board wipe. So this card is fantastic. Next is Jeskai Revelation. This card is expensive at 7 mana, but expensive cards, as we've already seen, can still get work done. And this one really does pay you off. So for 7 mana, you can return a spell or permanent to its owner's hand. So that means if the card is on the stack and hasn't yet resolved yet, you can bounce the spell back to their hand. So it's kind of like a little counter spell of sorts in that way. Or you can just bounce a permanent. It's also worth noting that that can be your own permanence if you have something with a very relevant enters the battlefield effect. And then you deal 4 damage to a target, usually killing one of your opponent's creatures, create a couple of prowess monks, draw 2 cards, gain 4 life. If you resolve this spell, it's almost impossible for your opponent to kill you on the next turn because you've gained a bunch of life, killed a bunch of their threats, gained some chump blockers, things like that. And if you're ahead in the game, it just closes the door so quickly. You kill their threats, you can even deal 4 to them, bounce their things. It's just such a formidable card and worth running at the top end of your deck, especially because in Jeskai, there are multiple cards that let you buy back instants and sorceries from your graveyard to put them back on top of your deck or back into your hand. And so you can oftentimes build a situation where you can cast the same Jeskai Revelation multiple times in the same game, which is going to be too much for your opponent to deal with basically every time. It's a great card. Next is Rot Curse Rakshasa. So for 2 mana, you get a 5/5 trample. Wow! But it does have Decayed, so it can't block, and when it attacks, you sacrifice it at the end of combat. That being said, the real power of this card is not just in the fact that it's going to clock your opponent for 5 damage before going to the graveyard. It's because it has this renew ability, which says you can pay X black black, exile it from your graveyard, put a decayed counter on each of X target creatures, and activate only as a sorcery. So basically, you play the Rot Curse Rakshasa, hit your opponent for 5 damage, and then it lurks in your graveyard and functions as a ability that is going to make it so that at some point, all of your opponent's creatures aren't going to be able to block, which in and of itself is very powerful if you're trying to finish them off, because you just save up, you have 7 mana or something, all of a sudden 5 of their creatures can no longer block, and you just attack them with all your guys and win the game, which is really great inevitability. But also, you can just use this to make it so that their creatures die if they ever attack you. So if they're being an aggressive deck, you make it so, okay, each of your creatures only gets 1 more attack. And so if you're able to build any sort of stalled board state, or even just get into a position where you're on the aggressive front foot, your opponent is never going to be able to stabilize against this card. And if they have just a couple of big creatures, you basically make those big creatures useless, because those creatures aren't going to be able to benefit from being able to hold back all of your forces, and if they only get 1 attack in. So it's just a really powerful card, and functions even better if you have some self-mill, because as we've already discussed, a lot of the power comes from this renew ability. So if you ever mill it into your graveyard without actually having to cast the Rot Curse Rakshasa part, it's almost like you drew almost the better half of the card. So that's just really powerful upside to have. So even if you don't cast the Rot Curse Rakshasa, using the renew ability is going to be formidable. This card is great. Next is Roar of Endless Song, just a seriously messed up saga. For 5 mana, you have the first effect of it coming into play of creating a 5/5 elephant. So 5 mana, 5/5. That's pretty good. Then at the beginning of your next turn, after you draw your card, it goes to chapter 2, and you make another 5/5 elephant. So you already spent 5 mana for 2 5/5. So that's 10/10 worth of stats spread across 2 bodies. Sure, it took 2 turns, but we'll take that. And then the third chapter is double the power and toughness of each creature you control until end of turn. So that doubles both of those 5/5s into 10/10s, and it's just going to hit your opponent for 20 on its own. It's just it's going to force some chump blocks, that's for sure. You have other creatures in play. You just basically, all those creatures grow into supersized monstrosities as well. And it just makes it so hard for your opponent to win the game, because you're making 2 huge creatures, and then you get to attack with those creatures and force some blocks. And even if they aren't able to block even one of them, they're going to take half of their life total. It's just a terrifying card, and one that is definitely going to make you want to play the team or color combination or splash the Roar of Endless Song. Next is Tarkir Revenant. So 3 mana for a 3/3 with flying, death touch, and lifelink is a really powerful card. It's going to be able to gain you life, so it can keep attacking in, and there's nothing that can really block it because of the death touch ability. However, once again, part of the most powerful part of this card is that renew ability, which means you can pay 2 and a black, exile it from your graveyard to put a flying counter, death touch counter, and lifelink counter onto target creature, which just turns any of your other creatures into a must-answer threat, because flying, lifelink, death touch on a big ground creature, or even just like a creature that maybe already has flying to give it death touch and lifelink, or really just any creature, makes it into a must deal with threat. So it's almost like you get a nice little 2-for-1 with this card. So if they deal with the first part of it, you're going to be able to get that renew ability to turn any of your ground creatures. And keep in mind, you can choose which creature gets those abilities. So you can choose your biggest creature. You can choose a creature like a 6/6 or something like that. And that just makes this card even better. And once again, it has that ability upside because of the renew ability is such a formidable part of the card that if you mill it into your graveyard, you just get to get that renew ability for free. And that's a really powerful ability to have. And Tarkir Revenant is going to be a card you're going to be happy to take early and be prioritizing in your drafts. Next is Warden of the Grove, another 3-drop. This one takes over the game very quickly. So it's a 3 mana 2/2, which is not the greatest stat line. But at the beginning of your end step, you put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Nice, a growing threat. However, it also says whenever another non-token creature you control enters, it endures X, where X is the number of counters on this creature. So as a reminder on what endure is, you can put X +1/+1 counters on the creature that entered, or create an X white spirit creature token. So you play your Warden of the Grove, go to your end step. It gets a +1/+1 counter on it. Great. Now every creature you play on the following turn comes with a 1/1 buddy or an extra +1/+1 counter, but this just scales up through the game. So if your opponent doesn't immediately kill the Warden of the Grove, you're getting a couple of extra 1/1s. Your creatures are getting a little bit bigger. And if this thing gets 2 counters on it, all of a sudden every creature you play comes with a 2/2 or 2 +1/+1 counters. This card demands an answer, and it demands an answer quickly. And considering it's a 3-drop that's really easy to cast with just 2 and a green. It's not like a multicolored card. This card is really, really scary and hard to deal with. There's even like a couple of other cards in the set that let you put +1/+1 counters onto your other creatures, so that can escalate the Warden of the Grove even faster than what it would do on its own. This card is terrifying, has to be dealt with, and if it doesn't get dealt with immediately pretty much, it's going to win you the game. So this card is fantastic. Next is Barren Step Siege. It's 4 mana, 2 white, black. And it has another similar effect on the game where it's just going to buff up your entire team. So a lot of the time, you're going to want to choose the Abzan mode on this card, which says at the beginning of your end step, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So you play this on turn 4 if you have another creature in play, or preferably have played 2-drop into 3-drop into Barren Step Siege. You're putting 2 +1/+1 counters on your team, and then just every time you play creatures for the rest of the game, every single turn they're going to be growing. And so you just have this inevitability where your opponent has to kill you, or just all of your creatures turn into absolute monsters. It doesn't even matter what they are, really. You can start with a creature that generates like a 1/1 creature token, and that 1/1 creature token is going to turn into a game-ending threat, which is just terrifying on a card that's pretty easy to cast, fits into really easy to deploy, even just for 4 mana, just buffing your entire team. And it's just going to be especially good with the cards that generate multiple bodies with 1 card, like any of the Endure creatures that make those tokens based on the Endure number. So you just play one of those, make 2 creatures, all of a sudden they both get the +1/+1 counters. That is truly formidable. There's also this Mardu mode, which you don't want to forget about because it can be relevant. So if you are going to be casting the Abzan mode almost every time, the Mardu mode, the times that it does come up, is going to be something relevant as well, where at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died under your control this turn, each opponent sacrifices a creature of their choice. So if you have creatures that have the mobilize mechanic, so they're creating tokens that are going to die every turn, that can be relevant. Or if you just have some sort of sacrifice engine, or you're just trying to attack your opponent every turn and know that they'll have to block and kill one of your creatures, that can be relevant as well. So keep that mode in mind, but most of the time you're going to want to pick Abzan with your Barren Step Siege. And finally, we have Dragonback Assault. This card is incredibly messed up. So for 6 mana, it enters and deals 3 damage to each creature and planeswalker. Once again, because you know this board wipe is coming, and because it's a mythic rare, so your opponent probably doesn't know it's coming, you can set up situations where you have a 4 toughness creature and you trade off your smaller creatures with their bigger creatures, or try to set the situation up to make this as favorable for you as possible. However, this card also says landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, create a 4/4 red dragon creature token with flying. So it comes into play, wipes the board of small creatures, and then every land you play after that, you just get a 4/4 dragon creature with flying spotted to you, which almost makes your lands better to draw than your spells at that late stage of the game when lands are often dead draws, and that's just absolutely stellar. And so the way you can play this card is if you happen to top deck it later, you just make sure you have a land in your hand, so you've just been drawing back and forth with your opponent. You slam this card on the board, you've been saving a land, hopefully, and you can just play that, get a 4/4 immediately, and make your Dragonback Assault even scarier as like a 7 mana play. But the fact that you can just cast this on turn 6 and then any land you draw is going to be a 4/4 creature just makes this impossible to beat in any long protracted game. And Dragonback Assault is absolutely stellar, and a card that, even though it's 3 colors, you can still often want to splash it in your decks that have maybe blue-green in them, and you just splash the red just to play the Dragonback Assault because it is that good. Anyway, that is going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the list. If you made it to the end of the video, leave #TheBest in the comment section down below, because these are the best cards in the set that will help you win your games. I hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe for more, and comment with your questions, thoughts, and feedback. But that's going to do it for this one. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time.